welcome back from Top of the Wall. My name is Mason Knopp, and we have another deck today. Continuing with the theme of breakfast foods for deck names, we have protein pancakes. Because we are named after and kind of built around our hydropon here, which kind of looks like pancakes, but with like maybe some little blueberries on it. And I thought that was just like really the easiest way to like name this. Maybe a muffin? Nah, let's just stay with a pancake. Definitely a pancake. And this creature, we will get back to this and why it is important in the deck, and why and how we are built around it. First, let's start with some of the meat of the deck. Let's start with all of our evolved creatures. We have Cloudfin Raptor, our 1-drop evolved creature, just a 0/1 with flying for 1 blue mana, but when a creature enters the battlefield under our control, if it has greater power or toughness than this creature, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Moving right up the curve, we have Shamble Shark, which is just a 2/1 flash and evolve for 2. We can do some sweet combat tricks with that. And we have Battering Corrosis. Crossus? Crossus. I'm pretty sure I've heard it pronounced Crossus. It is also 2/1 for 3 mana, but it has Trample, so it actually has some kind of evasion to go with it. Now, we also are using these evolved creatures to do more than just like evolve each other, but we're also using them for the proliferate cards that we have in our deck, the Pollen Bright Druid and the Bloom Hulk. Now, the important part about the Hydropon here, it has Graft 5, so it enters the battlefield with 5 +1/+1 counters. For 3 mana, that's really strong, even though that it can't attack or block. But the important part about this Graft 5 is whenever another creature enters the battlefield, we can move a +1/+1 counter from this creature onto it. So that means we can actually have Shamble Shark come in with Flash and get a +1/+1 counter. So it would actually come in as a 3/2 and can actually block and pose a real threat, or just come in on their end step, protecting it, and with that additional +1/+1 counter, then be able to attack immediately on our turn. Bloom Hulk is a really sweet one. Bloom Hulk actually gives us the ability to just almost overrun all of our creatures with +1/+1 counters, because when it enters the battlefield as a 4/4, that's bigger than basically that is bigger than all of our other creatures. That is one of the largest creatures in the deck that we have. So it'll definitely evolve all of our evolved creatures, and since they'll have +1/+1 counters on them from Bloom Hulk at this point, we can proliferate it. So each creature that we control that is evolved creature gets 2 +1/+1 counters, which is sweet. And we can use the Hydropon to put a +1/+1 counter on it, evolving it essentially, and getting another +1/+1 counter on it. So for 4 mana, we get a 6/6 plus 2 +1/+1 counters on all of our other creatures, which is insane. Now, to go along with this whole +1/+1 counter plan, we have Thriving Turtle, which gives us energy counters when it enters as a 0/3 for 1 blue mana. And when it attacks, we can spend 2 of those energy counters to put a +1/+1 counter on it, making it a 1/4, which is a pretty decent body. It can block the vast majority of things, can attack into most things without fear of dying. And it's not necessarily the most powerful thing in our deck, so we only have 3 copies of it. I felt like there's better things that we can do than this. For instance, we have Brackwater Elemental, a 4/4 for 3 mana. The reason why I like this thing, even though it has some drawbacks to it, is entering as a 4/4, which evolves everything that we have. And when it attacks or blocks, we sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So that means we can play it, attack with it the next turn, let it die, and then we can unearth it the next turn, which is another ETB effect for all of our evolved creatures, putting another +1/+1 counter on all of them, and gets in for another 4 with haste, sacrifices itself at the end step, so we get double ETB effects from this thing. One of the last creatures that we have in the deck is Aethersnipe. Aethersnipe is also pretty sweet in this deck. For 5 in a blue, we get a 4/4, and when it enters the battlefield, return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. But it has Evoke, so we can pay 1 and 2 blue, and we can cast it for its Evoke cost, and we sacrifice it when it enters the battlefield. So we get +1/+1 counters, and we get to return something to their hand, slowing them down, allowing us to build up our board and swing in a little bit more easily without fear of getting blocked or anything. The last creature of the deck is Pollenbright Druid. Just a 1/1 for 2 mana. Oh, but wait, it has more text. When it enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, or proliferate. Proliferate, putting a putting a counter on any permanents or players. Give another one of those counters onto it. So we get to essentially evolve all of our creatures once again, and we get to put another +1/+1 counter on the Hydropon to put more counters on more things later. We get to get more energy counters. We get to do just more of everything. I love it. So what spells are we playing to support these things? We have Attune with Aether, which helps fix us, allows us to find any of our basic lands, and we get to get 2 energy counters, so that way we can attack once again with Thriving Turtle, put another +1/+1 counter on it. We got Temporal Spring, allows us to put target permanent on top of its owner's library, and I would like to point out that Temporal Spring is actually a card that can target any permanent, and when it puts it on top of our opponent's library, although they do get it right back, they are losing the mana that they spent to create to cast that card, and they are skipping a draw step. So it is both a tempo gain and an attrition gain. So they are going down a resource, and they are going down the mana that they spent. And Titanic Brawl, in this deck, because all of our creatures have +1/+1 counters on them, this thing costs 1 less to cast. So just for 1 green mana, it's an instant speed card that allows 2 creatures to fight. It is instant speed, Prey Upon, a 2/of. I feel right now in the format, there's a lot of instant speed removal, so fight cards get a lot worse because it's easier to 2-for-1 people by killing the creature that you're trying to use to fight. So I only wanted to have 2/of in there. It's a little bit easier to work around. You can sneak it in more easily, like when your opponent's tapped out, and you can just use it more effectively. Okay, so the mana base for the deck is 7 forests, 7 islands, 2 Simic growth chambers to keep bouncing them back so we can make our land drops, the 4 Thornwood Falls so they fix us, and the 2 Caves of Temptation. The 2 Caves of Temptation are there for more additional +1/+1 counter synergies, and if we get flooded, we can actually use these to sort of throw our mana base away, so that way we can actually put the +1/+1 counters on our creatures, because the counters are more important than having the additional lands. For the sideboard, I want to point out like the things that we're the most worried about. We're usually more worried about the tempo decks this time, rather than the unfair decks. There's not as many unfair decks right now, and there's not a whole lot of unfair decks in Pauper in general. So I wanted to include some things just to fight against a lot of the decks that try to create tempo disadvantage for us and slow us down while just attacking in, like Delver or any of the Delvers. Any of the Delvers, yeah. So we have 3 Stormbound Geist, a creature that does have +1/+1 counter synergy. 2/2 flyer, can only block creatures with flying. That's okay. Delver mostly has just creatures with flying, but it has Undying. So even after it trades, it comes right back as a bigger creature. And we can put more +1/+1 counters on it, and it does evolve our creatures. And it's almost good enough to be in the main deck, but I didn't feel like it had enough synergy as a lot of the other cards did in here. So Stormbound Geist, just a good 3/of in the side. We have difficulties with Boggles, as Boggles just get out of control super fast. We have Serene Heart to blow up all of the aura enchantments. 2/of Relic of Progenitus to fight through graveyards, to fight through some of like Tron's graveyard shenanigans. Try to eat some of the graveyards from Blue-Black Delver and from Tortured Existence, which is the last deck that I just did. You should really check that out. We have Predatory Hunger, a card that is interesting. I felt like it was a sweet piece of sideboard deck tech. 1 green mana, enchant a creature, just an aura, and whenever an opponent casts a creature spell, whether it resolves or not, we put a +1/+1 counter on our enchanted creature. So, in the creature-heavy matchups like Slivers, what can happen is 1 green mana. Every time that they play a Sliver, one of our creatures gets a +1/+1 counter put onto it. So, because they're playing like 6-7 creatures within a game, we can gain like 6 counters on just one creature, which is sweet. We also have a Nekuro Stealth Suit to fight through any kind of targeted removal. It's just a one of, but I like having it in the deck because when we having it in the sideboard, there are a lot of matchups that are actually really removal heavy, and if we play this, any targeted removal stops working because we can throw it around for just 2 blue mana at instant speed. That creature gets Shroud immediately, which does not affect the evolve. It only affects Pollen Druid's ability to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. We won't be able to target with Aether Snipe, but we're usually not trying to. We have 3 Hydroblast to fight against Burn, and other kind of red decks like the Goblin decks. We have Gleeful Sabotage. Gleeful Sabotage is there to fight through Affinity and Enchantress, but mostly Affinity. It's mostly Affinity. Gleeful Sabotage destroys target artifact or enchantment, but we can tap 2 creatures to conspire to copy this spell. So for 2 mana, 2 tapped creatures, blow up 2 things. And I guess that would be the deck for now. If you're interested in how I built this deck or how I came to a lot of my conclusions, you can actually follow a lot of my progress down here in the maybe section on tappedout.net. A lot of these decks that I have worked on have huge piles of cards that just didn't make it into the deck, and my thoughts on like, oh, what I like to do with this deck. And there's always like a lot of stuff where if the metagame changes, there's a good argument to go into other colors and a good argument to change up the deck or change things that are in the sideboard. And a lot of times those pieces are literally right down here. I just felt like they weren't good enough for the deck in the current meta. But maybe at some point, Weather the Storm might actually be the card that we're looking for if we have, say, fewer 4-drops and more 1-drops. More 1-drops. Otherwise, that's it for the deck. Let me know if you'd like to see anything else. Come on in for that face touch.